Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to another episode of the Macquarie University Sunday Sessions. I'm your host, Rory O'Connor, and here's my co-host, Andrew Brennan. Andrew, how are you?
Good to see you, Rory.
Good to see you too, legend. Our topic tonight is who handled COVID better, New South Wales or Victoria? We have our special guest here, Gideon Rozner, Director of Policy at the Institute of Public Affairs. How are you?
I'm very well. Great to be here. I just feel a little bit underdressed, but that's all right, I suppose. It's Sunday after all.
Absolutely. All right. So my first question is, how would you describe the leadership styles of these two premiers? How are they different and how are they similar?
Yeah, I'll get to that. Look, just firstly, can I say thank you for having me on today? Are all of the people here watching from the Macquarie Uni Liberal Club?
There's people beyond it as well.
People beyond it as well. Now, the reason I ask is I was actually a Liberal student back in the day myself. I was president of the Melbourne Uni Liberal Club in 2008. And at that time, James Patterson, who's obviously now the very solid and very patriotic senator, was my vice president. And he's about to be the best man at my wedding as well. So firstly, can I say how good an initiative this is, how important it is to all the first years, especially listening. I presume you've all been off campus, so you haven't had the full Liberal student experience, but stick with it. Getting involved with Liberal students was the best decision I ever made. It's the reason I'm lucky enough to do what I do, and the people you meet will be your friends and political allies for the rest of your life. Anyway, the two leadership styles. I've asked myself this a lot because, Gladys is as guilty as Dan. My background is I was one of the first people at the IPA, and the IPA was the first organisation to actually talk about ending lockdowns when it was basically heresy in April 2020 and copped a lot of abuse. Now that position's basically mainstream. But Gladys is just as guilty as Dan. She's just as guilty of putting people out of work. She's just as guilty of causing mental health issues that we know about, particularly among the young. Lockdowns are not an unavoidable consequence of this artificial bullshit metric of case numbers. They are a political decision, and Gladys owns that decision just as much as Dan does. But I've been asking myself, why do I not hate Gladys as much as Dan? And the reason is, and not that it makes much of a difference at the end of the day to the people who've lost everything and whose kids have been messed up and so on, but at the very least, Gladys is at least apologetic when she orders a lockdown. At least she knows that she's doing harm to people and is trying to do it purportedly in such a way that it minimises the overall damage. Dan Andrews revels in it. Dan Andrews, for him, this is a crusade. Firstly, he's politically shameless, and obviously he wants good opinion ratings and to be seen as a leader and so on, and the "I stand with Dan" stuff. But also for him, don't forget, he's from the hard left. The hard left, not the loop, the green sort of touchy-feely left, the real the dark heart of the left wing of the ALP. So I think at the back of his mind, or at the front of his mind, there is this idea that this is the once-in-a-generation pandemic, a threat to thousands of people, and Dan Andrews, by invoking the power of the state, of strong government, it can defeat this disease through bureaucratic edict. There is an idea that the state can, through a few administrative orders, prevent death and prevent sickness. And that is, I think, where the differences lie. But again, both states are in lockdown. That nobody needs to be in lockdown. Nobody needs to be. They do not work.
If I can bring up the WHO now, whether you consider them to be impartial today or not, Dr. David Navarro is asking for countries to stop using lockdowns as their primary control method. Daniel Andrews, a former health minister, has made Melbourne the most locked down city in the world. Is this really what a former health minister ought to be doing?
No, but he wasn't a very good health minister either. He had all sorts of issues. I mean, he was the health minister in the Bracks and Brumby government towards the end, just before Ted Baillieu, for better or worse, was elected. And that was a reasonably moderate Labor government. They didn't really do much, but they were fiscally responsible. They were sort of Kennett light on a good day. Anyway, but the one thing that they'd stuffed up, or one thing that the opposition during all those long years had over them, with the hospital waiting lists and the ambulance times and so on, and that was Dan Andrews. He's not a very good public administrator. That's the other thing. He's great at spin, great at giving the illusion of strong leadership and so on, but he's an inept civil servant at the end of the day, and he hasn't done anything else with his life. So about the WHO, so the question was, should a health minister be locking down? No, is the short answer, but really what difference does it make? these decisions aren't really being made by, I mean, they are, but they're being made under the cover of health advice based on people who are equally clueless. I tweeted something just a little while ago when Dan made his big roadmap announcement a little while ago today, which was basically nothing. I tweeted, I said, well, instead of talking about, they talk about the Burnett modelling and the Doherty modelling about what happens at 70%, 80% vax. I mean, I'm sure it's got some academic, intellectual merit behind it, but I don't trust modelling. Full stop. I think when journalists and politicians invoke modelling, basically they're just modelling. It's like polling or anything else. You can say whatever you want it to say, depending on what the inputs are. But I said, well, what about modelling about the mental health damage? What about modelling that shows us how many more self-harm attempts there'll be among the young the longer the schools remain closed? How about modelling of what the poverty that these lockdowns will unleash will do to, again, people's health? What about the modelling of missed cancer screenings or people who are now too scared to go to the bloody doctor because we've basically created an entire generation of agoraphobics? It may be, it may very well not be. Nobody knows what the health advice is. I don't think actually those externalities such as they are being taken into account. I think it's purely on the basis, and again, I don't know this because nobody knows what the hell they're saying in those private sessions. It's not being made public, but I really do think it's just some stupid computer model that with a whole bunch of assumptions. I don't think there's any bearing on reality. Don't forget, we had people at the start of this pandemic in March and April say, well, even with lockdowns, we're going to run out of hospital beds and get 50,000 deaths and so on. This is bad. Again, I don't trust modelling. I don't trust it for climate change. And frankly, I don't trust it for this. Not to say there aren't a lot of really good doctors who know what they're doing in terms of epidemics and treatment and so on. But to base the public policy on modelling, particularly one as flimsy as this with so many assumptions that purports to understand the nature of human movement, it's not a good basis for public policy. And it's in my observation, uses a cudgel to limit our freedoms. Anyway, but back to the WHO, this is a really important point because the WHO, as recently as October 2019, basically when the virus was actually breaking out before we knew about it, but October 2019, their official guidelines said, we do, in terms of containing viral pandemics like this, we do not recommend lockdowns under any circumstances. The WHO, why did they change their tune? Well, because of China, and China did it, and China has undue influence over all these, international quangos. So, that explains that. But no, lockdowns were always going to erode our health. They're always going to make us miserable. It's not just a matter of it's inappropriate for a health minister to order lockdowns. It's inappropriate for any government official whatsoever anywhere to impose this on people. To commit an economic and societal war crime like lockdowns is not just that it doesn't work or anything else, is morally unjust, and no liberal democracy should ever have done it, let alone letting it continue for a second longer than it already is, which looks like what we're in for here in Victoria, and sadly also to a lesser extent in New South Wales as well.
So I suppose, what is the best way to measure the performance of a premier during this pandemic? Should we be looking at cases, deaths, impacts to the economy, the speed of recovery?
It's hard because all the premiers are bad, and the Prime Minister, frankly. I mean, look, ScoMo's got his moments, and, yeah, sure, better than Albanese would be, I guess, but all Australian government leaders should hang their heads in shame over what's happened over this. How to measure their relative success? I would say rather than metrics like case numbers and so on, because case numbers and deaths, that's really a test of the hospital system, fundamentally, in our health system. And we actually have a good one. I can't believe that they're still worried now, 18 months later, about the state of the hospital system melting down when they've had 18 months to build it up. And don't forget, for as long as I've been alive, and certainly you guys, every election, state, federal, all we've ever heard from both parties are, well, we're going to commit X billion and we're going to invest X billion in Medicare, or we're going to build a new wing of X hospital. What have we been paying billions of dollars for if a country like Australia that prides itself on our admittedly good, but bureaucratic and expensive health system can't handle a straight of viral pneumonia like this, especially 18 months after the outbreak? Anyway, I've gone off a tangent. What was the question again? It was...
the question was, what is the best way to measure the performance?
Yeah, beyond case numbers and things like that, because the premiers can't control case numbers, really. They've tried to. Lockdowns don't work. Beyond that, the way I would measure how well a premier or a prime minister or anybody else is, their political courage, how they stare down the, again, big public health, the media, academia, public servants, public service unions, all the people who are pushing for lockdowns but actually don't suffer from them, who still have their jobs and who still have their privileged positions. That's why I would say still, again, after everything that's going on, and while I think the vaccine passport idea is abhorrent, I would still say the best of the lot has been Gladys Berejiklian, because, again, at least she tried. And at least she's trying out. Sydney is supposed to be this big disaster because Gladys waited too long for the lockdown. They're actually going to get out of lockdown before Victoria will. So I think in the shallow gene pool of Australian leadership, the ones I respect the most are the ones able to say, look, okay, case numbers, whatever, health advice, modelling, that's all good. I don't care what the AMA says. They have a role, fine. But I am the Premier, I'm the Prime Minister, I'm the leader, I'm the democratically elected person here. I'll take into account the health advice, but I also take into account the cost, the multitude of other costs that I've mentioned and people are keenly aware of. So I'd still say probably Gladys. Other than that, I do admire Michael Gunner just because, he's been pretty lockdown mad, but the thing I admire about him was that when he ended the Northern Territory lockdown, he did the keg convoy stunt, which was a political stunt, but he personally went to inspect the kegs of beer on their way back to Darwin pubs and did a big photo op. That I kind of respect. So yeah, I'd say Gladys because she's the least worst, and Michael Gunner because he had the keg convoy, which I admire as an alcoholic.
The elected officials, I feel like one of their primary roles is protecting our freedoms and understanding that they have been paid for by the blood of young men. And why is it that so few of our elected officials are speaking about the authoritarian turn that our country has taken and all of the West has taken?
This is a really interesting idea, and this is why organisations like yours and the IPA and so on, this is what we get that other people don't necessarily get. They get the inconvenience, they get the points I just raised, but on a broader level, and this is what bothers me, we have crossed lines in the last 18 months that are absolutely shocking in terms of our basic freedoms. As you said, Andrew, in a liberal democracy, the job of our public institutions, the social contract is such that they protect our freedoms, our public safety, defense of the country, as he talked about, literally going off and dying, people paying in blood for our freedoms, resolution of disputes, and a safety net for the most vulnerable. Depending on which school of libertarian, conservative, liberal thought you subscribe to. All of our public institutions, all of them have failed to protect our freedoms, be it the courts who've refused to overrule any of this stuff, be it the media that should act as a handbrake and to hold these institutions accountable. Largely, they have just repeated the health advice, what is it said at those idiotic press conferences. Human rights bodies, where have they been? Hello, the Australian Human Rights Commission? Tim Soutphommasane will raise merry hell over a cartoon by Bill Leak, or they'll clap some students from QUT and Iron because they object to an Indigenous-only computer lab. But when it comes to the freedom of movement of millions of people, so yeah, we've crossed so many lines. We've made it illegal for Australian citizens to return to their own country. We've made it illegal to leave our country. We're like North Korea. We have allowed a situation in which the government tells us to stay in our homes for 23 hours a day. I have to carry papers around Melbourne to show that I have permission to go to a workplace. Literally, I can be asked for my papers. What we have to worry about is the precedent that this sets, because if they do it over this, they will do it over something else. But this is, so why are so many politicians not speaking out about this? Well, because politicians, a lot of them don't care about freedoms. And that's in the name of the ideology they subscribe to. People say to me a lot, why do they call themselves progressives? They don't believe in progress. With a word like progressive or conservative or any "iv," it is the way that ideology views the role of the state. So a conservative will look at the state as something to conserve our freedoms, conserve our heritage. In some cases, you can have certain views on various social policies and how that will conserve, traditional way of life and so on. A liberal, the job of the state is to liberate or libertarian to preserve our liberty. For a progressive, the role of the state is progress, and it's their version of progress, but they think that the state should be actively involved in changing our society. Whereas a conservative wants to conserve our society, progressives want to use the machinery of the state and the coercion of the state to remold society in their own twisted, warped idea of progress. So for a lot of them, again, it's the same Daniel Andrews syndrome that I mentioned earlier. They are looking at this and saying, see, look, and there will come a time, history is written by the victors, they will say, oh, well, because of big government and, because of a strong state and collective action, we beat Corona in Australia. So shouldn't you listen to the experts now and agree to collective action for climate change? It's a very, very dangerous, precarious place to be for the nation state. And again, I just, more than anything else, I fear for the precedent. What will the next emergency be? And what will the next set of emergency powers be? And what will be dangerous misinformation then for those who speak out against the next emergency regime, whichever it is? Will be a climate emergency? Probably. An inequality emergency? Inequality? Seizing people's property? Will it be, will they find some other, will big public health finally get a win on the so-called obesity epidemic and finally start getting fat taxes and things like that? Will you have to show a passport when you buy a Big Mac to show that, you don't have any health issues or something? It sounds crazy now, but I guarantee you there will be people out there in big public health, public health lobbyists and academics and bureaucrats who will be saying, who are getting a big, big wind in their sails out of this, because this is the public health will be getting what they always want, which is control over our lives, and they won't give it up easily.
Absolutely, and I could well believe it. I suppose when it comes to a responsible service of alcohol, the person selling the alcohol has a responsibility to look after, who's consuming the alcohol. Perhaps in the future we'll see something like that at McDonald's. Sir, you've had enough cheeseburgers. That's enough for you for today. Perhaps. Yeah. Who knows?
Yeah.
Anyway, one of the next questions that I've just been sent in here is, to what extent and how do you think the cultures of the two states, New South Wales and Victoria, impacted the way their populations responded and are continuing to respond to the pandemic?
Weird, isn't it? I wouldn't have, before 2020, I would never have been able to give you a running commentary on the political, I guess I could have in a way, because Victoria's basically a Labor state. New South Wales is a little bit more conservative, despite the likes of Matt Keane and other villains like that crawling around. But I think that there was a certain left-wing sensibility that Dan Andrews was able to play into. See, this is the thing about Dan. He is an evil, monstrous human being, but he's a phenomenal politician. And he spent a lot of public money on consultants and spin doctors and so on. And it's all out there on the public record who, he hired full-time consultants that gave him briefings every day on, how to pitch this message and that message based on focus group and so on. But still, he had the political talent to be able to hit Victoria at, I guess, its pressure points in terms of that political culture. So he was able to talk about, everybody's hard work and our sacrifice and how proud we all should be. And this idea of the collective that I guess is built into Victoria at a certain level, which is, we're virtuous because we work together and play by the rules and so on. And I guess Victoria was a little bit more susceptible to it. Would people have, in the Northern Territory, cop a lockdown like this for so long? No bloody way they would. Northern Territory is one of the few glorious libertarian frontiers left in Australia. So yeah, there is an element in which Victorians, sadly, are more inclined to cop it, but not for much longer. I think that's changing even here in the Socialist Republic.
I hope so. The description that you gave just then reminded me of Napoleon from Animal Farm. I read it relatively recently, and I'm now realizing the parallels. Can you tell us a bit about how Victoria became so left-leaning?
It's always been, because and this is something that's written about a lot by the Canberra Press Gallery and so on, and the major broadsheet newspapers. Victoria used to be the jewel of the Liberal crown under Menzies and so on. Now it's not. Well, that was a very long time ago. Where do we start becoming so left-wing? I mean, even the Liberal Party in Victoria, even the heroes like Jeff Kennett, who did a phenomenal job. I mean, anybody who wants to understand what, sadly, I'm roundly disappointed with Liberal governments almost everywhere these days on a regular basis. Everybody wants to see what the Liberal Party can do. It is absolute best when it has the courage and more importantly, it doesn't apologize for its values and doesn't try to play catch up when it at its best, the Liberal Party in the Kennett government, but even Kennett was a moderate, so to speak, on social issues. Then you got into the Brax-Brumby years with people like Ted Bowyer being the leader. He was a lefty, Red Ted, we used to call him. He won for better or worse. And it's been a state where we just don't have the regional outer suburban conservative heartland that places, say, like Sydney, New South Wales and Queensland do. That said, it's changing. And it's changing over this. I think this lockdown in Victoria will create two things. It will firstly create, sadly, an underclass of people who've lost everything, who've lost their businesses, who've lost their jobs, who've lost their incomes, who've lost their homes. They will be angry, and they will know how important freedom is in a way that typically, have you ever spoken to somebody from Eastern Europe about this stuff or about freedom generally? Eastern Europeans are typically the most conservative, wonderful people you'll ever meet, because they know what it's like to live under communist dictatorships. So I think we'll have sadly a working class, and sadly not working class of people who will be angry and understand the importance of freedom. And that will be a lot of people, because a lot of people have been damaged by this. But secondly, we will have, in your generation in particular, or even Generation Alpha who are coming in now, there will be a generation of kids who will either be hypochondriacs and germophobes and agoraphobics, or they will be scarred by this but hardened by this. These are kids who have had to endure classrooms over Zoom and all other sorts of stupid things. They will know what they missed out on, and they will know that what's been done to them. And I think they will be the generation, hopefully your generation, Gen Z, that will rise up, and the more they get into the economy, they graduate from university, they have purchasing power, the more that corporations start marketing to them, who don't give a shit about wokeness because they know there are real problems in the world. The balance of power will shift away from whiny millennials of my cohort, these hypochondriacs who were already in the workforce when this hit and loved sitting at home and on Zoom with their jammies all day and, were afraid of this bloody virus they weren't really at risk of dying from in a statistical sense. I think there will be a turning. I think that some good will come out of this. And this goes way beyond the question, but I think we'll see the slow collapse of the nation state as we know it, as we progress in blockchain technology and things become decentralized. I think this has been the last stand for the oppressive, bureaucratic, managerial, industrial complex that's nestled in the nation state as we know it. There will be a paradigm shift that, for all the pain of this, something's good is coming from it.
Well, the next question is, what are your thoughts on the rhetoric and the discourse of comparison between the states of late? I think a lot of Australians have been quite disappointed with the bickering and almost, American-like level of rivalry between the states.
Yeah, I think it's stupid. This is, and again, I said Scott Morrison's disappointed me. I think part of his legacy will be the slow fracturing of the federation that we've seen. You cannot have a unitary country or even a federal country, which we are, where people cannot travel around it. That is, you are no longer a nation state. You are no longer a country if you can't, if that country isn't widely accessible to everybody. I'm a Victorian, sure, but I'm an Australian. I am just as entitled under my God-given and constitutional rights under Section 92 of the Constitution that says trade, commerce, and intercourse between the states shall be absolutely free. That is my right. It's my right to go to Broome and Bundaberg and Bunbury as much as it is my right to go to Brunswick or Ballarat. So the bickering between the states, I think it's bloody appalling. It is political one-upsmanship. It is a symptom of the fact that they're all chasing short-term headlines on the news. It is cynical because it plays to a state of origin parochial instinct that's baked into people as a part of human nature. Anastasia Palaszczuk is trying to get a few extra points in the polls because she gets a grab on the 6 p.m. news, giving those stinky New South Welshmen one up them. And look at the consequences of it as well. Again, it's a bit different from the question you've asked about the political dynamics and how appalled people are, but I think it bears going into. We currently have encampments on the New South Wales-Victoria border. People who cannot get into their own state, who cannot go to their homes. The international law defines that as being an internally displaced person. It is a breach of human rights. We have internally displaced people in a first world country. But people, so to coming a long way around to your question, I think people are sick of it. They don't like the fact they can't visit their interstate relatives, but there has to be a reason it keeps happening, because it seems to poll well. Because again, it is a cynical manipulation of unconscious instincts of people that, they feel they're being deliberately terrified by their governments, and then the governments can claim a win by keeping them safe and scapegoating fellow Australians, scapegoating people from Sydney or Byron Bay or something. Anyway, I think people look. Eventually, what will happen is Gladys will do a travel bubble with Singapore or something, and then the other states will start doing their own travel bubbles. So when you have people flying from Sydney to Perth via Denpasar, I think then people realise the whole border closure thing is completely goddamned ridiculous, and it'll have to end. But until then, bureaucracy moves slowest.
So last week we had Dr. Rocco Loiacono, and one of the things that he mentioned is that we currently don't know whether these current measures are legal. So, for example, the movement between the borders, will it be interpreted as, will absolutely free be interpreted as reasonable and proportionately absolutely free, to the point where a public health order could override such a thing? But then he also brought up that, you could potentially, because quarantine is governed by the Commonwealth, that you could label all of Australia a quarantine zone and therefore bypass that entire problem.
Oh, yeah, you probably could. Look, and you could, and Rocco would know more than me. Rocco's a great man, by the way. He's a mate of mine, really, really smart guy. So he would know more than me on the legality. I actually haven't, I've lost track of where those court cases are up to. I know there was the Palmer challenge and things like that. I don't think they got leave for that. So the court wouldn't even hear it. And again, as I said, the courts haven't been any help in this instance. Almost every case brought against lockdowns or border closures or curfews or whatever else, almost every case, I think there've been a couple that have gone our way, but almost all of them have taken the side of government. So, but speaking as somebody who hasn't practiced law in, when did I quit the law? 2014. So 7 years. I would look at as a matter of statutory interpretation, I'm not sure how many law students are watching, but the words "shall be absolutely free." Would Henry Parkes and the people who wrote our Constitution have envisaged this when they wrote the words "absolutely free"? That was their intention when they wrote the Constitution, that a respiratory illness could lead to a chaotic system of state borders that bang open and close more often than a dunny door in a cyclone? What I think should happen, here's how I'll end with the border. What if Scott Morrison really wanted to preserve the integrity of our federation, and I mean really wanted to, he would deploy the Australian Army to accompany people across state borders and stare down state cops. He would assert the army securing passage across state borders. He would use the military to uphold Section 92. That's what should happen. No Australian should be prevented from traveling around their own country like this. Never, ever, not, because again, it's easy to be a country. This is about more than just case numbers and politics between premiers. This is about the future of the Commonwealth of Australia. Something has to give, because this can't go on much longer. The country will break apart. The bloody WA will secede. Half of them want to anyway, so,
Well, it's perfect timing for the next question, which is, what do you think the futures of the two states will look like as vaccination rates increase?
Yeah, so, okay, well, I mean, basically, and this is the good news here, that we've turned a corner in this debate, because both Gladys and Dan, and I never thought he'd do this, he's basically admitted that lockdowns don't work. They have both said these lockdowns will not get us to 0 cases. So a lot of people are saying, well, A, what is the point of these lockdowns? And B, what was the point of all of them? I think the weather will start warming up. I think people will start, the picnics will turn into complete rages, which I'm looking forward to. I've said to my fiance this morning that we should just get everybody in groups of 5 around a park and get like some guy there with, a big sound system and drinks and eskies and all the rest, and, have an absolute rager. That'll start happening. People will start just going crazy in parks. The police won't be able to control it. I don't think the vaccination rate really makes much of a difference. I think people will start, I think the protests will get bigger and more ruckus and harder to control. We already saw the police lose control of them yesterday, not encouraging anybody to break the law or anything like that, but they can't control the protesters. They can't control ordinary punters who just want to get drunk in the park now. People will get vaccinated, and vaccinated people will feel more confident in going out, whatever the hell the rules are. And I think a lot of the political complexity of all this will get lost. I think people will, they don't follow it as closely as we do. They won't get the spreadsheet of, 5 indoors and everything else. They'll think, oh, great, vaccinated. Looks like we hit a target. Well, I guess this is sort of over then, and they'll start moving around. So I think by the end of the year, these lockdowns will become defunct. And I've been saying ever since Gladys and Dan conceded that lockdowns aren't working and won't work, they'll just become harder to enforce. And Gladys and Dan know that Dan in particular knows he's on a loser and can't keep this going much longer. Gladys does want to open. Dan couldn't give a shit about opening. He just wants, good ratings. I think, my personal opinion. Don't sue me, Dan. I think they will continue, and I've said this for a while, they will continue to issue roadmap after roadmap after roadmap after roadmap and another plan and stage 4A and 4B, and they'll just gradually relent and try to save face by issuing these stupid PDFs that give the illusion of them being in control, but they are not. They have lost control of the debate. So that is a cause for optimism. People are finally over this. They won't cop it much longer.
I do wonder, though, if they'll get control of the debate when the Mu variant arrives, because that one's supposed to be vaccine resistant. And so I personally wonder whether we could be back into a lockdown. We do have an audience question from Craig. The vaccine passports and QR codes, it is on the cards that there is going to be a national card monitoring everywhere you go, and it will be expanded. What can we do to stop this dictatorial creep?
Well, I haven't heard about the card that tracks everywhere you go. That's a new one to me, but I believe it. I mean, I think it could happen. I remember when vaccine passports, when you mentioned it, you just sounded like a nut. It was basically dismissed. Oh, vaccine passport. Nobody's going to force you to get vaccinated. It was always a right-wing talking point. In fact, it was more than that. It was a fringe extreme idea. Now they're basically, they are coming. I have said many a time that I think we'll get vaccine passports, but I don't think they'll work. Don't forget that stupid app that Scott Morrison came out with. What was it? The COVID Safe app. Like people downloaded it, but it didn't work. I think it tracked one case, or half a case, or something like that. QR codes, they are, as my experience, New South Wales people actually do take them seriously. Here in Victoria, I can tell you that very rarely, sometimes they are check-in man and everything else, but they're not enforced all the time because businesses can't enforce them. I think you'll need a vaccine passport probably to get into Crown Casino or Star City or a footy match or something, but businesses are not going to have the time or resources to check everybody's bloody vaccine passport. They'll become a nuisance and eventually they'll just be abandoned. And we see other countries abandoning them too, like the UK and Denmark and so on. And the other thing about vaccination is the compulsory vaccination or vaccine passports and things like that. A lot of unions are coming out against it, which is an interesting dynamic. Now, what's Dan going to do when the CFMMEU comes to him and says, well, we're going to pull support for your government and bring you down politically if you make our workers get a compulsory vaccination because I don't want to. Do you think Dan's going to wear that political risk? Of course he's not. So I think a lot of this will solve itself. The question was, what can we do? Geez, what can anybody do? I'll be straight with you. I'm getting the vaccine. I would get it anyway, just because I do believe on balance, it's probably more, give me some protection if I get the damn thing. I don't want to be as sick as a dog for a week. I don't think anybody should be forced. This isn't like MMR vaccines and weird theories about autism and so on, where you're talking about children too young to decide and other people's children too young to be vaccinated. Everybody who has anything to gain from this vaccine is well into advanced age and well and truly capable of deciding their own health decisions based on their own, needs and fears or misgivings or whatever the hell. It's their choice, their body, their choice. So what can we do to resist? I don't know. I'm getting the vax. Because I don't want to be locked out of pubs. We just have to keep doing what we're doing, meeting, discussing, waiting for our moment. But this will fall over. You can't suppress human freedom forever. The Berlin Wall came down because eventually it just became unmanageable and people just tore through it due to an administrative fuck-up. That's what will happen here somehow. These things they have a way of ending.
I have an audience question here, and it says, do you think the Victorian Liberal Party makes for a robust opposition against the lockdowns now that Matthew Guy is back as opposition leader?
Yeah, and this is sort of being from Victoria and having dabbled in big organised politics, as I call it, in my misspent youth. I got to know Matthew Guy and Michael O'Brien very, very well. I like both of them. They're both actually quite solid, and they both do share our values. And they're actually both ex-Liberal students. Michael O'Brien was president of the Mulk in 1992, and Matthew Guy was president of the La Trobe Uni Liberal Club. So again, stick with Liberal students because so many of them end up going so far. But Michael O'Brien, yeah, look, both of them have underperformed as opposition leaders in their times. I think Michael was a bit risk averse. I think I don't think that you can really gain much for picking at the little minor details and arguing for slightly less bad lockdowns or lockdowns that make slightly more sense, because people will just go, all right, yeah, look, okay, it could be a little bit better, but I'm not going to take the risk and change government over something that might improve my life 10%. It needs to be, these lockdowns are wrong. It's time to end them. Here's a better idea. I think Matthew Guy will do that to an extent. I don't think he's going to go the whole hog and say end the lockdowns, but I think he's learned from his mistakes. I think he has the political skills to go toe-to-toe with Andrews. Don't underestimate Matthew Guy. So broadly, I think it's good. I think both Mobby and Matthew Guy would have made great premiers. I think Matthew Guy can win. You know, don't forget the economy could completely keel over like it did in the Kane Cooner days before Jeff Kennett was elected. Matthew Guy can win, and I think if he wins, he would be Kennett Mark II for Victoria. I really, really do have high hopes for Matthew Guy.
Well, that's excellent news, because if I can ask this next question, what are your thoughts on both premiers' approval ratings and their respective upcoming elections?
When does New South Wales go to the polls? That's in...
I think it's March 25th, 2023, I believe. So not for a while.
Who the hell cares about opinion numbers now?
Well perhaps for Daniel Andrews, because I think that's in...
Oh, yeah. No. That's not to say the question wasn't a worthy one. It is a worthy one, because it's you know... So Gladys, I think Gladys will... I think she'll get some points for at least ending this, and people look at Melbourne and think, Christ, you know, she didn't get everything right, but at least we're living better than those poor souls in bloody Melbourne still in lockdown in November. I think Chris Minns is quite dangerous for Gladys. I think he's coming in at the right time. I think, you know, he presents well. I think he could win. But Gladys, I think it's hard to say, because, again, I don't want to let her off the hook for having ordered a lockdown. No politician should be off the hook for that. I don't think that she should be off the hook for introducing a vaccine passport for reasons I've just explained. I think that's monstrous. But would Chris Minns have done anything different? No. I think, again, because she's the least worth, she probably deserves to be re-elected. Dan Andrews, well, his popularity has slipped. His polling numbers are actually... And again, the reason he's backing off, the tea leaves to me seem to say that the anger is coming through on focus groups. People were once willing to say, okay, well, you know, it's bad, but this is dangerous. Better just follow the rules. I don't think as many people are saying that anymore. The IPA has polling that we haven't released yet, actually, showing, I don't think we've released it, showing that even in New South Wales, for example, only a third of people think that lockdowns should continue or are worthwhile. Like, that's a third. So there is not the majority community support for either, well, we have to follow the rules because this is dangerous, or, okay, look, this might be a bit silly, but let's just keep it going. It's only for a while. People are mad. And if the damaged, I mean, Victoria will be a hollowed out dystopian hellhole for a long time. A lot of businesses here, retail occupancy rates are low, very low. And Dan has spent so much money on, you know, tunnels and all sorts of other things anyway. I'm not sure how much more stimulus the Victorian government can muster. So, yeah, I think end of 2022, it's still a year and 3 months away. I think, you know, state, Dan's like 18 seats ahead or something, but state elections are extremely volatile, especially in these days. I think if the consequences of what Dan has done become clear, and I think they will, then there'll be a lot of people out there with baseball bats. And it's not beyond the realm of possibility. They might just quit at the end of the year and see the writing on the wall.
As the effects of COVID-19 start to disappear, then, do you think people would just want to change, regardless of who the government is? Do you think it's, I suppose, connotations similar to Churchill after World War II? You know, landslide defeats. Do you think people would just want something different?
Yeah, maybe. It all depends on what happens with ScoMo, I think, as well, because ScoMo will go before Dan goes. And I honestly can't pick it. I think on current circumstances, ScoMo would win. I think if Labor gets smart, and I think Bill Shorten would actually be a viable candidate. I think we underestimate him in our peril. And I quite like him because he's bought me a beer on 2 separate occasions. Once as a Liberal student when I went to Canberra and convinced him I was president of the Bill for PM Club at Melbourne Uni. But he's a good fella. Anyway, if ScoMo loses, then Dan Andrews will lose, because I don't know why this is. I think it's a Victorian thing. but they almost always vote against the party in power federally every single time. The last time the Victorians voted for the same party in power federally was 1996, and that was because the election was called 3 weeks after John Howard won. So it was still a new government and people still had it in for the Keating government and so on. So that was a bit of an outlier. But in 1999, Jeff Kennett lost against everybody's expectations. I think partly because John Howard was in the lodge and he just won in 98. In 2010, Ted Baillieu won again. I wasn't expecting him to win. I didn't want, to be honest with you, I didn't want Ted Baillieu to win. I didn't think he'd make a very good premier, and he didn't. So that was a waste of 4 years of a Liberal government. But he won in 2010, partly because Julia Gillard had just been re-elected and had done a deal with the Greens and so on. If an Albanese government is okay, so let's war game this. The election is in March. If an Albanese government or a shortened government or plebiscite, it won't be plebiscite because she couldn't beat ScoMo, but if an Albanese government is in and starts doing crazy things, the economy tanks, which could happen. That's the other thing I'm basically obsessed with. What the economic apocalypse from all this will be, and have no doubt it is coming. The economy hits the wall. Albanese, is a little bit ineffective. People will have it in for the Labor Party, and the Labor Party's been in government here for a long time. By then, 2022, when did they win? They won in 28 years. Okay, well, no, it's not beyond the realm of possibility. Yeah, so I think that's the biggest metric. What happens to ScoMo? That's the linchpin in all this.
If I can ask one audience question, do you think the government will backtrack on these new powers that they've given themselves post-COVID?
No. No, they will. Well, they're being made under states of emergency, which theoretically should end, at least here in the People's Republic of Victoria. But no, they're not going to give back these powers. No. I've never seen the state, nor am I aware of the state voluntarily relinquishing extraordinary powers ever for any reason. At most, we've gotten a bit of deregulation around the margins, of certain sectors of the economy, but in terms of microeconomic reform. But no government anywhere in history has ever voluntarily given back powers. They will be used again. They will be used again, whether it be for climate or some other goddamn thing. The language is there, the norms are there. They know that basically nobody stood up and said this is wrong and immoral and unjust. Everybody went along with it. So, and they know that it can be politically popular. We have invented a model for government in which they pick up some, threat out there in the ether, scare the absolute shit out of everybody, do whatever the hell they want, ruin hundreds of lives, and get re-elected. Look at what happened in WA and Queensland. Not that Zach Kirkup or Deb Frecklington were much shop, especially Zach Kirkup. I mean, that guy. Talk about liberal moderates and moving to the left will somehow get the Liberal Party re-elected. Yeah, oh really? Okay, but yeah, we have set precedents that will come back to haunt us. My hope is that next time people say, "Oh no, we know how this ends. 2 weeks to flatten the curve, horse shit. No, you're not doing this to us again." That's my hope, that people learn now that when lunatics like me came out and said it's time to win the lockdown now, there was a damn good reason, and that was because there was no way this was going to be 2 weeks to flatten the curve. This is a fundamental reshaping of the relationship between state and citizen, and if we are not careful, it will be a permanent one.
So I'm just seeing the time now, and unfortunately we have run out of time for this evening, although there's been questions after questions. We could probably keep going for ages. I'd like to thank you, Gideon, for your time this evening. It's been fantastic having you on the show. My pleasure. Thanks, guys. And yeah, keep up the good fight. And yeah, just stay involved with Liberal students. It's important. From the wings of the Liberal students, the next leaders who will save this country will come forward. So learn the dark arts of politics, the most fun and the most intoxicating way you possibly can, in my experience. Perfect. All right. Thanks so much. I'm Rory O'Connor, your host. My co-host has been Andrew Kremen. This has been the Macquarie University Liberal Club Sunday session. Thank you so much. Good night.